live, and then we are about to go live. Okay, we have first people coming in, 20 people or so. Okay, and then let's just wait for YouTube to be up and running. There we go. All right, perfect. Cool. So yeah, let's give folks another minute or so to come in. Daniel, you are in Chicago today, right?
That is correct.
Have you been locked down there for the past 6 months, or could you travel a little bit?
Been largely here, working from home since mid-March. I have my 2 younger children, 12 and 9, at home with me right now. Well, before they start their schooling after the Labor Day holiday here in the States. And my wife is actually works in a school, and her institute week is this week. So she's actually back to school right now.
All right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of feedback from people that have little kids at home and needed to do some homeschooling and all of this. That was a pretty intense time from what I heard.
We'll see how it goes once they restart school. So it's going to be a hybrid type model where I live. So fingers crossed, but ultimately I think generally speaking, everybody's trying to do the best they can with the circumstances that are presented with us.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, then let's get started with our episode of Sellics Thursday Live. For those of you that are joining the first time, Sellics Thursday Live is a bi-weekly show in which we invite Amazon industry experts to discuss strategies and tactics on how to successfully sell on Amazon. Today, the topic is on scaling on Amazon, or on how to scale on Amazon profitably. It's a little different than we had of the past episodes. So the past episodes were quite focused around everything on advertising and the news and new things that Amazon released there. But today we wanted to talk more broadly about Amazon and how you can grow and scale on Amazon profitably. I think that's a very, very important, word in this. And so this conversation today is going to be more strategic. Sometimes it's more tactical, sometimes it's more strategic. Overall, this conversation today is going to be a bit more strategic, which is very good from time to time to look at the big picture. And for this, I'm very excited that we are having Dan here today with us. So Dan is working at Rise. Rise Interactive is a pretty large agency in Chicago. It's actually one of the first agencies that we've ever worked with, and I think already back in 2017 or so. So quite a few years ago. And I think Rise was one of the first ones that joined Amazon and has seen a lot of changes and growth also in the industry. So I'm very excited to have Dan here with us today. Dan, welcome to the show. And yeah, you want to introduce yourself? Briefly?
Thanks, Franz. Really excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and including me in the conversation. My name is Dan Ripes. I'm a VP of the account management team at Rise Interactive. I've been with Rise now coming up on 5 years. My role is like I always say, is my role on the account team is that we are always focused on connecting a client's business goals to whatever digital strategy that we are helping them execute. Try not to get so well into the tactics and the shiny objects that digital marketing can ultimately provide, but ultimately keep our eye on what the business goals that we're trying to accomplish and how do we connect that strategy, our digital strategy, to that. And Rise, just for context, is a full service digital agency, as you said, Franz, based out of Chicago. However, we do have offices as well in Mexico City and Buenos Aires. So we are more than just in the United States. And we generally are focused on 3 particular groups of clients that are generally we're working with. I think for our conversations today, one of the main pillars is, let's say, B2C product brands or specialty retail that are selling directly via e-commerce, which ultimately falls well within, an Amazon platform.
Okay, cool. So it's very much coming from the brand side of things. I'd say overall, those are more mid-market to larger brands, right? So you wouldn't work typically you wouldn't work with a small beginners brand, small private label. It is more, let's say, mid to large brands.
I would say that is a fair characterization.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's always important for the audience to understand from which angle you're looking at things. So just some housekeeping before we move into the topic. If you do want to ask questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll go through them and make sure to answer all the questions. And as always, there will be a recording available on YouTube, also on Spotify and all the podcast kind of channels, so that you can follow there if you need to drop out early. So Dan, let's assume a typical situation. Let's assume I'm one of the brands. I'm a product brand direct to consumer. I already have some business on Amazon, but let's say not outrageous amount of of revenue. And I give you a call and ask you, well, I'd like to grow my revenue. That's my business goal. I want to make more revenue on Amazon. I want to make more money on Amazon. What is the typical conversation that you would have with me?
Sure. That's a great place to start. So where we will, with any agency partnership, we would assume that we're going to start the conversation around the goals. And the way that we'll try to characterize that when we're talking to new brands within Amazon is kind of breaking those out into, let's say, 3 different potential buckets. And bucket 1 would just say, we'll call it revenue at all costs. We're focused on acceleration. We want to drive, high market share, capture some short-term, and potentially start to think about, long-term growth opportunities. But we're really much more focused on how do we really just capture revenue. A second bucket would be, let's say, or a second one would be more of defending market share, right? You have, I don't think that's necessarily what we're referring to here today, is that you have a very large scaled program and there's different competitors coming in, and ultimately you're just looking to maintain your position. Generally speaking, the middle pillar, if you will, is where clients are coming to us to say they're looking for a balanced approach. And what I mean by that is to say they're very much focused on growing share, but they have a finance team that they also need to report to. And there's a little thing called profitability that also needs to be considered as we're looking to scale revenue. So I think that's where we, so making sure that we're aligned there, because this is not to say that you can't do one versus the other, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I think ultimately just making sure, hey, if you had to pick one versus the other, which one are you going to pick if, push comes to shove? And then it's ultimately starting to understand, where do we sit in terms of, what data is, it's not just the conversation, but what data is available, and how do we start to collaborate to understand, how do we scale profitably? That involves a significant amount of a conversation and understanding transparently, somewhat of a margin conversation with regards to the products ASIN's portfolio that we're going to be focused on. Not every client is going to be comfortable sharing margin numbers with an external agency partner. Right. And we have that in some cases. Sometimes clients are saying, hey, here's what it is. And in other times clients are saying, no, that's something that's intellectual property. We cannot share that out of our walls. So when that happens, maybe we're working on, kind of a red, yellow, green guardrail system. So we at least have some context around category level, ASIN level. And once we have that, that's, the first step is us understanding how do we start to understand where do we have room in terms of a margin perspective for certain products, and then where are there ones where there's a little more margin elasticity or sensitivity. And, that's really where we're starting from. And we're going to have a really good conversation, if you will, a little discovery there when we're getting started. And that will ultimately dictate, what are the levers or where do we potentially want to go once we have a good handle there.
Okay. So most customers then would have a balanced approach. And in order to keep profitability, you need to have access to some sort of financial metrics, if I understand you correctly, to really make sure that you can grow, you have access to profits.
Right. And generally when we see it, we'll see it's either one of two situations for the most part, right? We either are seeing companies that are coming in low efficiency and high revenue, right? That's generally the majority of where people are coming in, right? They're coming and they're saying, I'm starting to see some sales, but finance team is really starting to,
Yeah.
have a conversation with us on the P&L. Sometimes you're getting also the opposite situation where the clients are being, where however it's being managed, whether it's being internal or from a different agency, is that, it's a lower revenue, but they are seeing efficiency. And then it's more of the sales team is coming to them and saying, we need to grow and we need to grow faster. And if they're saying we need to grow faster, but the finance team is, holding restrictions, that's when, putting everybody on the table and having the conversation when you're starting to share margin and starting to connect those things with regards to the media data that we have access to, that's the building block of ultimately, I think probably where you and I may go from the conversation, but those are the building block pillars to be able to even start thinking about how to scale smartly and profitably.
And so let's assume in an ideal scenario, I'm a very transparent client. I provide all the data that you want to have. You have all the margin information. How would you go from this? I mean, if you have access to all the data, what is the important data and how do you use it to then derive the next steps?
Sure. So, I think, as we look at, let's say, connecting, that's to your question, how do we start to connect, kind of the digital KPIs that we're looking at to attach the profitability? Because, one of the things that, my team, they hear me say, even clients will hear me say is, I'll hear things about, ROAS is our goal. Like ROAS is a KPI. That's an efficiency metric. It's not a goal. Your goal is either revenue or profit. It has to be one of those two things. And in this case, right, we're talking about both. So, really what we're talking about here is to say, when we're looking at it, from our perspective, the initial things that we can ultimately start thinking about is to say, where is ad spend contributing toward ship COGS? And then how is that contributing to margin? And then ultimately the other big lever that's going to be sitting from a marketing perspective is what they're spending in promotions. And usually those are, the largest, I'm saying, let's put aside, some of the, the cost of doing business with Amazon. I'm talking more in terms of like what we have levers on from a marketing perspective. So I think as we start to look at that, what we're going to see very early on is that there's an inclination that you're going to want to be spending across the entire portfolio of products that you're selling within Amazon.
Right.
And almost every time when we start working with clients, we generally will say is that we need to spend on the right ASINs first. We need to promote the products that are responding to advertising within Amazon. Right. So most often they have a very large SKU list, an ASIN list. And over a very short period of time, we are going to align with them to say that there's only X percentage of ASINs that we're actually going to want to put dollars against. And that's just basically, the nature of how things work within Amazon. There are various reasons as to why people are not responding to the advertising message within Amazon. And we'll, if you want to go there, we can get into that type of conversation. But generally speaking, where we're going to focus on is to say, where are we able to find the right efficiency in terms of which products we should be promoting via advertising spend and or promotion. Okay. And that's going to be a smaller percentage of probably what the overall portfolio is. And the goal there is to really optimize ad spend and the mix of promotion. Let's at least start with a category level and really just understand how do you do that, well at a category level. And then from there, and again, I don't want to just gloss over in terms of like, these are big things that we're talking about here. And there's a lot of things that go into each of them. But, if you start thinking about it from that lens and what's the right mix between those two and focusing on the right ASINs from there, then we're going to start to say, how do we start to refine the balance of the mix between those two? And then we can start getting into specific ASINs within each product category. That's kind of how we think about, the evolution and how do we start to evolve from where a client starts to aligning to the margin goals and finding that right spending mix between ad spend and promotion in order to squeeze as much juice as we possibly can with regards to the ASINs that are performing within Amazon.
Okay, so so you get all the data, and then the trick is not every ASIN is the same. So there are some that are better to push and others that are not, right? How would,
Without question.
how do you have a certain amount of buckets where you put those ASINs? Do you just have two, like those are the winners and the losers? Do you have green, yellow, red? I mean, how many buckets do you have, and what KPIs do you use to group those or to assign the ASINs into buckets?
Sure. Great question. Thank you. So I would say is that, generally we are going to want to categorize the way we will generally set up campaigns, is looking at things based off of how a client looks at their business. Right. So, I agree that, we may be looking at things in terms of, you say like I don't want to say the winners and losers, but really, the ASINs that are performing, maybe the ones that are in the yellow and the ones that are red, but we will keep those within, the way that the client is categorizing their product lines. And then within those product lines, we will always have conversations with regards to which of the ASINs that are performing, which of the ASINs where, there's, medium performance, and then which are the ones that, we should consider, adjusting which product we're promoting, or potentially pulling back spend and kind of reevaluating, what's going on there from a larger perspective as to why it's not performing. And then from there, then it's kind of aligning, and the reporting is to share back to the client and say, okay, here are, within the category, in the product category, here are the ones that are clearly performing. And we know kind of, and when I say performing, right, you asked that question. So, where are we seeing increases in ship COGS in conjunction with let's say a percentage of tacos that a client is comfortable with, whether it be at that particular product, or, if we can get to at that ASIN level with regards to the margin that they're comfortable with, and then overall looking at what is the category, and are ship COGS moving in the right direction? Are we within some sort of framework with regards to tacos? And then ultimately there is a ROAS component associated with this conversation. But I would generally say when we're having the conversation, it's more around growth in terms of a ship COGS. And then where are we sitting from terms of, let's say a tacos perspective, which ROAS is somewhat directional to that.
Okay. And so you mentioned something interesting here where you say, well, it's about advertising. So deciding which are the first ASINs that you want to start advertise, but also promote and run promotions together with advertising. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on this? So
Sure.
How do you guys do this? So,
and to be transparent, that's a conversation that evolves over time. Right. And what I mean by that is that generally speaking, it involves more than just the marketing counterparts that we're working with our clients. Many times, we welcome having the finance team at the table with us. I know that a lot of times marketers will, could shy away from that, but really, if we're really going to be talking about, this from a P&L perspective and making sure we're all looking at the same metrics and on the same page, the best relationships that we see is when we know that we either are talking in the same conversation, marketing and finance, or that marketing and finance at the client side are having a good collaboration and conversation. So that's where, I bring that as the opening salvo to answer your question, is because, most of the time you're starting off and you're really just trying to optimize, you're really focusing on the marketing spend, right? What we may be doing in AMS, for example. Right. And then I think it takes, once you kind of have that down, then you're starting to look at, the interplay between, the promotions that are going on while we are also pushing spend with regards to a particular product line or category line. I think, where it starts to evolve, or how do we start to look at, is when we start to look at we're starting to look at promotions, and that really there's a set seasonality associated with that, right? What is the right time to be putting things on promotion? And, just because everybody else is putting something on promotion, does that mean we should be putting something on promotion? Right. And then when you are putting something on promotion, that doesn't necessarily mean that you just need to also scale as much as you want from from an advertising spend perspective. Does that give you the opportunity to push and be things more efficient, or be able to push maybe those middle performing ASINs that are not necessarily on promotion, but maybe if you're able to push a little more spend there, especially maybe for example, more in the non-brand perspective, and bring more people into your product, your product detail pages, that may also allow you to, lift the overall portfolio of what we're talking about. So I guess, I don't want to be so long-winded, but generally speaking, we're looking at the seasonality associated with the promotions in the lens of what we're doing from an evergreen perspective from AMS. And then also kind of, let's say, if you start to dig into that, what are the size of the promotions that we're doing? Because, that's obviously a critical factor here as well. And so to understand the balance between the ad spend and the promotional spend, how does that look from an overall margin perspective? And then, adjusting the levers accordingly and testing and learning, right? A lot of times, and I'll pause here and then we can continue. I'll pause and finishing this is that, many times we'll see sometimes they're, you're going to want to do binary, right? What does it do if it's all promotion or if it's all advertising? Well, generally speaking, your best tests are done when you have both going and you're adjusting and you're starting to understand, where do you adjust the knob rather than trying to make it so binary.
Okay, so ultimately it's about, there is a certain margin that you have and that you're willing to invest in. The question is, do you invest it into a promotion or do you invest into the advertising, or 50-50, 80-20, whatever it is?
And it's generally both. But again, the idea here is to say that, knowing that if you're going to be putting certain products, if you're going to be looking at a certain product category on promotion or certain ASINs on promotion, right? And if we know that we don't necessarily have to push as much from an advertising perspective there, where's the best place to, if you will, reallocate those short-term dollars in order to push an additional product category or push additional ASINs? Because, you don't want to necessarily just put everything there, right? There's an opportunity where, the margin may be really strong if you're not pushing advertising as much when you have something on promotion. But if you're also considering, now I want to take it for another product category, another ASIN where I can put dollars to, where we've been, the hypothesis has been that it's underfunded in some regards. And obviously budgets are somewhat fixed, right? I haven't met a client yet that has an unlimited money tree building in the backyards of their houses or their businesses. So we're ultimately having to make decisions to understand where should we allocate the dollars most effectively as possible. When you look at it this way, you have the opportunity to scale some other ASINs and other product categories and overall lift the ship cogs while you have other things on promotion. So I just think it's a healthier way to be considering it. It's a much more, it leads to more strategic conversations with your clients. And by the way, I will also be transparent that not all the time, the profitability may not always be, a critical factor in some cases when you're selling on Amazon, right? This certainly becomes more when it's this is more of a conversation from, these conversations happen more when there's maybe not so much a regular occurring purchase, right? A consumer packaged good may not have as much of a focus on profitability as, let's say, ones that are selling where, the purchase may be, every 3 months, 6 months versus something that you may need every week or every other week.
Right. Okay, understood. So, so a very balanced approach to thinking on what's the incrementality of the margin that you're investing in
Correct.
In other words, right? I mean,
and
which ASIN, and then which lever? Is it the promotional lever? Is it the advertising lever? And then navigating your way through this.
Yep. I mean, cool. And by doing it this way, you generally, or by having this, when this is important, the ability to continue to unlock budgets and scale becomes a lot more straightforward internally and externally.
Okay. Now there are already a bunch of questions that we have. Let me start to pick some of those questions.
Sure.
So Gloria asked,
I'll do my best.
if you had to pick pick top 3 important things to look at for scaling, what would those be?
I'm sorry, cut out. What you're saying? What are the 3 most important if we're looking at scaling?
Yes.
Well, if we're looking at scaling, now, I'm going to put, let's put scaling as a question with regards to just growth. So maybe if we put the profitability side on the side there for a second, largely speaking, ship COGS is usually the first and foremost, KPI that we're looking at. Some clients will talk about, we'll have some clients and how that translates. Sometimes it'll be the PO value or the PO velocity that they're working on with Amazon. So that can kind of go in a couple of different directions, but ultimately whatever we're translating revenue to, and, usually ship cost of goods sold is, for most part, kind of an industry, acceptable acronym that I think a lot of people are comfortable with using within Amazon. Basically what are we selling minus the juice that Amazon's taking, if you will.
Right.
In terms of having a second or a third, there's probably then a conversation with regards to, understanding and having a conversation with the client is to say, going back to my original point, right? If there's going to be only so many ASINs that you're probably going to want to promote at a given time, just because of, what's performing, make sure you're aligned with the client is that, if all these ASINs happen to sit in one or two product categories, is that okay? Or is it going to be a concern because there's going to be some other product categories within internal stakeholders that are not going to be happy because they're going to say, why isn't my category selling as well? And some of the, Dan's category is doing great, but why is Franz's category not doing so well? Those are internal, politics that we all have to deal with. Right. So I would say is, understanding, the second pillar there to answer that question is just kind of what's the comfort level in terms of spend with regards to making sure the mix, the portfolio is well covered versus just, focusing on, the ASINs that really are performing from a marketing and an advertising perspective, really. And then I would say the third component is, from a scaling perspective, is really trying to get to, being just having a process in place is to understand when an ASIN or a category is not responding to advertising, right? We're pushing dollars to it, but it's not selling. Replace it, right? Either
the product.
So when I say replace it, and we can get into that a little more deeper if you want, but, take action. Is it a price issue? And do we have to think about something from a promotion? Do we think about, bundling it with another product and create replace that underperforming product with a new bundle? Or is there a new product altogether that the innovation team is working on within the company that potentially could replace that underperforming product, right? So I would say is making sure, the third part is understanding the guardrails associated with that, because, the ability to unlock budgets quickly to scale is to show that you're being very effective with the dollars that you're being provided initially.
Right. Okay. There was another question also from Sean, was asking, what would you classify as a large corporation? We're looking at options as we move into the holiday season. So I guess this refers to kind of target audience for Rise. When does it make sense? What looks like then
say. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, now you're back. Okay.
Sorry.
You were frozen.
So I'll answer that question that I used to be a little bit more on the sales side. So what I would say is that, and now I'm obviously much more on the account management side, right? Managing the client relationships. Reach out to me if there's a true interest. And, if we're not necessarily the right group, there may be, if it's size related, then, we may know somebody who thinks like the way that we do, and we can put you in that direction.
Fair enough. What's the best way to reach out to you? LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's fine. I'm happy to give my, if I dare say if I give out my email, but I would say, let's start with LinkedIn, or I know that I think, I appreciate Sellics and the way that they were promoting it. I think, Twitter, my Twitter handle, was also being used, which has a little bit of a nickname, transparently, from when I was younger, but feel free if you wanted to reach me through that channel as well. But I'm happy to respond in either one of those. and then
Okay.
we can exchange emails and take it from there.
All right, perfect. Look, I think you said something very interesting here is about, well, what happens, how do you handle products that are not selling well? So you said one of the first things you do is you map out the landscape. You understand which are the ASINs that are performing very well, which are the ones where you can drive revenue through promotions and through advertising. But there are a bunch of ASINs, and I know the same when we talk to customers. It is fascinating how 80-20 just keeps applying, and you have the top 20 ASINs or 20% of ASINs that generate 80% of the revenue, and then you have a bunch of long tail ASINs where there's not that much going on. So what do you do with those? And you start looking into this already, or talking about this a little bit, but more specifically, what are other ways, if promotion and marketing is not working, what are the levers that you have there, and how do you treat those ASINs?
Sure. Great question. So I always say that, it's up to, it's up to us as marketers to kind of understand, where do we think the issue truly is, right? We're putting spend against ASINs, to your question, and it's not selling, right? So we talked about, a couple levers, but before we start pulling levers, what do we start looking at to decide what's the best lever to pull? What is the action we should be taking? And, a lot of times, the conversion, looking at conversion rate, we'll start to uncover some of those insights. Before we look at that, right? Because ultimately what we're trying to understand here, is it truly an underlying issue with regards to the product itself? Or is there something that's going on within, is there something going on with the digital shelf, if you will, that is not allowing this product, this ASIN, to perform as well as it should? So, generally speaking, the first thing that, I don't want to say the first, but let's say, in somewhat prioritized order, how we would think about it is, let's look at what's going on within the buy box, right? This is not, for those people who are obviously managing Amazon campaigns, this is probably not, something, I'm not speaking anything revolutionary here. We want to look at, is there something going on from a third-party seller, right? That is, undercutting price or doing something that, is not necessarily aligned with, ultimately, are they playing nicely, right? In some cases, that's could be what's going on. Or is there a ship date? Is the ship time that Amazon is offering with regards to that particular product, is that evolving? Right? We've been so trained through Prime that we want things tomorrow. Some of us, if we live in large cities, we get it today. COVID changed that in some regards, and it's still evolving with some of that. So, what Amazon is offering in terms of when this is going to ship is certainly a lever that's is playing a role here. And then obviously there's inventory issues. There could be out of stock, supply chain. These are all things that are going into that. So the first thing to answer your question is to say, is there a conversation that is needed, either who's ever managing the inventory side of it, or is there a conversation that's needed with the Amazon rep to understand what's going on with some of these issues, where there are things changing? Our ship times are increasing. There is some third-party sellers. We're losing the buy box. What are the issues associated with why we're losing a buy box here? Let's start digging into those things first. That's probably where some low-hanging fruit is, because hopefully these are things that are temporary, and that you can either understand, what do I do if this is just temporary? Do we just kind of pause promotion, or do we shift things in a different direction until this improves, et cetera, et cetera? The second one is, then let's go back to kind of the things that we can control, right? So the second thing that we can ultimately control, and there's a lot to unpack here, is let's start looking at, just basically the content, right? And that's a lot there, right? So do we have, we know ratings and reviews, right? We all know this is obviously a very important component with regards to selling successfully within the Amazon marketplace. And just marketplaces in general, right? We don't even just say it's just Amazon, but for this case, we're just speaking specifically about Amazon, right? So do we also have the right A+ content, right? So, that's a very large component within that, right? We can get into that, deeper if you want, but, what we're talking about here is, the taxonomy and tying back to the right search queries, right? We're going off an assumption that we probably know generally speaking, what are the right queries
Right.
that are driving the right traffic to our PDPs. So I don't want to gloss over that. That is somewhat of an assumption that I am making as we're having this conversation here today. That's always an evolution, but let's kind of like put that off to the side for a second, kind of go off the idea that we feel good about the, the keywords that we're driving. So then we're looking at the search queries and making sure the taxonomy associated with that is lined up. Again, as I go back to users and reviews, there's a lot of good data in there. We all know that, right? And it just takes time, takes energy to uncover what those insights are in there and the actions we need to take off of that. But generally speaking, companies are, the customers are telling us what they like about it, right? So how do you translate what they like about it into that content, right? And if there's questions that are coming about within the, the reviews, how are you addressing that? And that's kind of, are you, the areas where you have the right to win, is your content speaking to that? So that's kind of like the next thing that you're looking at. Again, there's a lot to unpack there, but I just kind of want to address, your question. So that's, let's say, the second one. And then, let's say the third one is to say, we're taking up the right real estate with regards to content. We're messaging our right value proposition. Then we want to start looking at what's going on externally. Our competitors doing something, is there something that's changing with regards to their promotion or their pricing? Did they change their content? Did something improve on their ratings or their reviews? All of those things, right? And then, or did they have something on promo? So all of these things that we start to look at it, you start to, decipher this data, you glean insights from it, and then you could take action from that, right? So in some cases to say, well, the aha moment is that we weren't converting nearly as much. It wasn't a product issue. We weren't converting as much because a competitive ASIN that is very similar to us is dropped their price. And that is ultimately why they were ultimately taking some market share temporarily from that. So then the question is, do we want to consider a promotion strategy there? In some cases, was it a content rating review issue? Well, then we start to dig into and say that, do we have the right messaging there? Is there things that we can be levers that we can pulling about the things that we just talked about? And do we start to see conversion rate improve? Is it a product issue? And then if you're pulling all these levers, you're not moving in the needle in the right direction, that's when you start talking about, hey, we have to have a serious conversation here. We need to replace this product with something else that we have. And that's when it's conversation with, the client, is to say, what else do we have available that we can replace this with? What's coming down the pipe that may be able to be replaced? So a long-winded answer, I apologize, but wanted to get through the bullets there.
It's a very complex topic, but I think it sounds like you're very systematic about this. Do you have internally, when you have those questions, do you have a checklist that you go through and you say, first we check this, then we check this, then this, and so forth?
And the big thing here is that, and this is not just a shameless plug for you, but also it's also making sure that you have the right agency partner. That's obviously important, but really you also need to have the right data and the platforms that are necessary in order to glean the data here and stitch it together properly in order to get these insights, right? The things that I'm talking about here is not things that Rise is just sitting on because we have this proprietary data set, right, of information that nobody else has. This is that we're working with partners like yourself and we're stitching things together in let's say maybe the way we're stitching it together is a unique way of how we're looking at it, but that's how we're prioritizing and gleaning the insights that we need in order to take prioritized actions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I always look at it is that fundamentally on Amazon, it is pretty simple math, right? Your revenue is units times price, and then your units are impressions times click-through rate times conversion rate. And then the question, then you can always drill down and deeper. And so what's affecting your conversion rate? And then you have a list of things. What's affecting your click-through rate? You have a list of things. What's affecting your impressions? Again, a list of things. And so it is very mathematic. The challenge is, well, you have so many different data points that are impacting this. Some of them that you can control, some of them that you cannot control. And then you have this per ASIN, and you have a bunch of ASINs. So it's incredibly complex because of this. And then it gets even more complex because you're not alone on the market. You have the competitors around you. And so bringing all those things together is an incredible challenge. I think it's one of the things that we try to solve at Sellics, right? But it's at the core, it's very mathematical, but implementing and operationalizing this is super challenging.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, because I completely agree, is that when you are stitching data, these, we're talking about different data sources from different places, but as you stitch this together, it's going to be very clear as to, what insights you should be taking from that, right? And you'd much rather be leveraging, automation, how you're stitching these things together. You don't want to be spending a lot of time and people power in order to take this point and stitch it with this point. Right. The idea here is how do you automate as much of that as possible in order for the people to be focusing on, analyzing the data to derive insights from it, rather than actually having to actually build the reports, then start analyzing it.
Right. All right, cool. Well, that's yeah. I mean, it's exciting, but I think it's a key insight as well, that not every ASIN can be made successful. Sometimes it's just the product. No matter what you do, the product is not fulfilling any need on the market. It's not competitive, whatever it is, and that's I think some of the challenging discussions that we have sometimes, specifically with smaller customers or smaller brands that are just getting started, is that, well, sometimes there's not much you can do if it's the product is not the right one. You need to be honest about this as well.
Yeah, but as to your point, right, Franz, like that can be a very delicate conversation to have with a client with regards to that, right?
Right.
That's going to be, you may be opening up some wounds, but if you go through a data-driven approach as to how you're coming to the conclusion of why you think that this may not be competitive within Amazon, I think it softens the information a little bit. And it's also allows you to inform them, well, based off of this, what should you also consider, right?
Right.
You can show them, hey, are you able to, can you adjust some of the features within the product to be more aligned with something like this? We may perform better. Are you able to manufacture a product similar to this at this price point? We think this would also allow us to compete more. And that's really more when it's like, okay, now you're giving me information that I can go back to, I can take back to the product development team. I can take back to my innovation team and start to decide, can we do this or not? When you're just coming back and just saying, here's the problem without any, suggested solutions as to how to address it, that's really where you're going to have, more friction in that conversation.
Do you see this happening a lot, that specifically in large, I know that a lot of smaller companies are doing this, but also the companies that you work with, that they actually take the feedback and the input from Amazon about what's working and what's not working on the market, and this actually translate into product innovations or product adjustments at least? Then I think you're gone again. Frozen. Okay. Let's hope that Dan will be with us in a second. There we are. Oh, yeah, I think there you go.
Working from home is I don't have the same high-speed internet that I do if I'm in the office. So I apologize to all the viewers and listeners here. What I'm saying though, so finishing my thought there, I think you're asking, the question is to say, we don't necessarily have these conversations with every client, right? This isn't necessarily it may not necessarily be, right? Because now we're talking, we were talking here mostly around, scaling profitably, right? And this is also a conversation around, somewhat of a profitability play as well. But yes, Franz, with your, to answer your questions, that, yeah, I think as we're able to stitch more of the data together, and as we're able to get, our insights don't have to be limited to just marketing, right? We're not saying, what, you have to go. Building off of also what's like working from home. So where I'm going with that is to say that we, as marketers, we don't, we don't always have just sitting in the marketing data, right? How do we leverage, Amazon, I think, is a unique, marketplaces in general are unique in this regard. So how are you able to, to build off this data to better inform decisions that you're making within your company as well? That it shows how strategic this, the sales channel can be. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's incredibly valuable information on Amazon. I always say that historically you would pay, I don't know, 50K, 100K to get the same feedback that you can read for free on Amazon by just seeing how well products are selling, what people are highlighting in the reviews about the product, how the competitor is highlighting their own product and what the USPs are. I mean, this is free market research.
Exactly right. And how do you, and that's right. And thus as marketers, right, it's our, should be our job, to bring out those insights, leveraging all that information that is available to us.
Right. And I think that's an important point, because it's broadening the mandate that you have as a marketer as well. It's not just about changing bids. It's about, well, how can you take all your insights and all the data that you have available to drive revenue for a brand.
Right. I mean, it's very much, it's shopper marketing, right? There's some merchandising component to it, marketing, right? I mean, you're in the store and you have two products, right, but side by side that you're just deciding against. There's a lot of information to understand why is a consumer picking one over the other.
Right. Yes. I mean, and I think on Amazon you have the advantage is that you can provide more information to the shopper than you could in a store. In a store, you have the price, the brand, and the looks of it. But on Amazon, you have the detail page and you have a bunch of other things that you can do, right? So
exactly.
Look, we're already 48 minutes in, which is 28 minutes, 18 minutes more than we always intend to, but that's great. There are just a bunch of questions. If I look at the list of questions, there are a lot of things. John is very exciting that's where you notice it's a proper live show, right? When the kids are walking in.
That's right. It's not taped.
It's not taped, that's for sure. Cleo had an interesting question, branching off Amazon a little bit, direct to consumer side. So when we talk about the big picture of scaling profitably, direct to consumer websites, Shopify sites, like whatever system you use, is this something that should be considered? Is this something that you guys are considering?
So great question. The majority of the clients that we work with also have their own direct to consumer website,
right?
In addition to selling on Amazon.
Okay.
And the answer to the question is honestly, and I hate giving an answer to it depends, because obviously it's related to what are the business goals associated with that particular brand or that particular client. What I will say is that I think it involves a very strategic conversation as to say which products you are more open to sharing and selling within Amazon, and they're going to be more I don't want to say, again, it's understanding is to say which ones of which products that you're selling that you feel that you need to have more of a relationship with the people who are making those purchases versus other products where the relationship may not be as important. Mm-hmm. And thus the scale that Amazon provides is the right place to be. We have these conversations all the time with clients. And hey, transparently, Amazon is, also doesn't always make those conversations super easy to be had as well. But I think that is one that, I think I think if you start to think about which products you really want to make sure that you have some sort of first party relationship with regards to who's purchasing that, then maybe a D2C approach is the importance. I think the great thing, to be transparent, and the difficult thing that Amazon has ultimately provided for all of us is that the experience within Amazon in terms of how quickly you can check out and how quickly you're able to purchase things makes it a challenge to how to match an experience that's somewhat on par when you have your own D2C site. So I think those are the things that you're ultimately balancing as you're making those decisions. But generally speaking, most clients that we're working with have both.
Yeah, I think the way that I try to, and I agree with you, it's one of those questions where the answer is it depends. I think high level, the way that I simplify the world is in that case that I say, well, I think it depends on whether the customer would buy multiple times from your brands, either because it's a recurring product or because you have cross-selling opportunities, right? I think that the more you have repeating purchases or multiple purchases, the more it justifies a D2C site, because you will have the lifetime value to invest into reasonable cost of acquisitions. Like very transactional, I buy this once and never buy again from the same brand in the same store. I think is a lot more difficult to make work, specifically from the profitability angle that is important in today's show.
Yeah, I agree with that thinking. I think obviously there's a lot of there's a lot of challenges that also come back into just managing and operating a D2C site, right? There's,
of course.
I mean, just matching, again, when you're thinking about what, the expectations that Amazon has presented to us as consumers, there's also a supply chain and logistics aspect of it, which I will be the first to say that I'm not going to speak about it at all, right? I'm a marketer. I'm going to stay in my own lane. But that's also provides its own challenges and opportunities too. So, I think it's just it's a larger conversation to have internally as well.
Right. Cool. I'm just trying to go through. There are some questions around what is tacos, right? So tacos, I assume total ACOS.
Total advertising cost of sales. What would be a marketing or a marketing webinar if we just didn't speak in a bunch of acronyms just to make it sound smarter?
Yes. So the difference between ACOS and TACOS is that ACOS is only advertising revenue by ad spend, and TACOS is advertising revenue plus organic revenue divided by ad spend, right?
Correct.
So that is TACOS, ACOS. What's considered a good ROAS for an ASIN? General terms. You want to give an answer to this one, or?
To go back to your original point, honestly, I would say, again, I hate answering the question with depends. Right. So I would say is that it should be a reasonable percentage based off of the target margin that you're ultimately looking for.
Right.
ROAS for a toothpaste brand is going to look different than the ROAS that you're looking for from a mattress brand. Right. But I think ultimately, if you think about, what is a target profit margin that you're looking for, that should ultimately translate to what you think the appropriate ROAS that you would look for.
Yeah. Nice. David, I can give you some, let's say, I can't tell you what a good one is, but I can tell you that from what we see in the data in the US, across all the customers and all of it that we have, we're anywhere between 20 to 25% of average ACOS, which is 45 ROAS. I don't know if it's good or not. It's the average.
I would also just build off of that, is going back to something you were just saying, right? If there's a repetitive purchase, right? And again, if you're acquiring new, right? Amazon is starting to show data with regards to new to brand, right? That's a nice metric to be looking at too. I think I'm interested in how they continue to evolve that, right?
Sure.
But, certainly your ROAS, if you're very much in a customer acquisition mode, you're probably gonna be a little bit softer in where you want to be from a ROAS perspective, because you just want to be acquiring as many new customers as possible. Versus, to Franz's, other consideration, if it's a one-off, purchase that they may purchase once a year or every few months, I would think that you have to have a different thinking with regards to your ROAS, because you're not going to have that many bites of the apple there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's that is one of the challenges that it oftentimes it just depends. Every advertiser in a different situation has different circumstances and different goals, and so it's hard to give one general answer. Look, I think
what I would push the group is to say that ROAS is great. But if you're able to start to evolve or think toward lifetime value, I think it provides even a better insight and prioritization of how you think about it. Now, I will admit we're talking Amazon here today, so
right.
That becomes a little bit more of a challenge. But
that's actually my number one ask when I talk to the folks at Amazon. They ask me like, "Hey, what is it that we should evolve or do?" And then I always give them the answer. Look, ultimately, it's about lifetime value over cost of acquisition, and Amazon is covering so much of the cost of acquisition and so much of the lifetime value. They should be able to provide those numbers. Right? So I hope that someday this will come. I'm not sure, but I'm lobbying for this for I don't know, a year and a half now. So.
You'll have to keep using your poll there.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's close with the last question from Veronica. She was asking, how do you measure incrementality on Amazon? That's something that we, and I think that's again one of those questions where the answer would probably be unsatisfactory because there's no.
It's very hard.
Yes.
I mean, transparently, it's very hard. Certainly, we are starting to use things like the new to brand metrics that are being available as something directional. We are also looking at kind of the interplay, if you will, of the percentage between the percentage of the attributed revenue from advertising, and then versus what is the lift also from an organic standpoint. So kind of seeing what does the delta look like when you are advertising, when you're not advertising, you're kind of seeing, what's being, at least what Amazon is attributing back to the advertising, but then, what is the halo, I don't like using that term, but, what do you also see from an organic lift as well? That's where you start to see what that delta is. You can start to parse out a little bit from an incrementality standpoint. It's still going to be directional, but at least it's better than, we think it's this.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, Dan, and thanks for everyone for the long list of questions. We couldn't go through all of them, unfortunately, but I hope we touched on most of it, and most people got some answers. Dan, that was great, very insightful. I appreciate the time that you spent with us. Again, if someone wants to get in touch with you, it is either LinkedIn or Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
I believe it's Mr. Boozy 17, but I would say that it's much easier to find me on LinkedIn. Right. My name is Daniel Ripes. I'm at Rise Interactive, so I should be one of those top searches if you just throw that into LinkedIn.
All right, perfect. And then, Rise Interactive from Chicago. So either search for the website or LinkedIn, right? And you'll find those guys. Just reach out and have a conversation.
And friends, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. As you know, we truly enjoyed the partnership that we have between the two companies, but really enjoyed the conversation today. Hopefully people found it valuable, and looking forward to future conversations with you as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And then see you next time.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye. Bye-bye.